we're going to need a list of the tools that we'll need for this project. We're going to need a clay knife, a plastic or wooden modeling tool. We're going to share a metal rib tool. We're going to need a lump of clay in the plastic stage. A sponge is not a bad idea to have around, and you definitely need a cup of water. We're going to first divide our clay in half, and you can either cut it or tear it. I choose to tear mine. Mine has been sitting out for a little while, so it's a little bit dry. I'm going to dip the edge slightly in water. Then I'm going to squish it and wedge the clay together. That is, using my hands to squish it back into a lump. I'm trying to keep it relatively lumpy and solid, not thin it all the way out. And I'm going to be making a pinch pot with this one. So I want it to be relatively the same. A sphere, a short cylinder, or a cube would work. I do that by pressing, squishing, rolling, knocking down the long sides. Then I'm going to poke my thumb into the center of my pinch pot, almost all the way down, but I'm going to leave about 1/4 to a 1/2 inch on the bottom, so my thumb is not poking out, and I'm going to pinch between my thumb and my fingers. I'm going to be pinching as I work my way slowly around the pinch pot. I'm not trying to do this all in one go. I expect that it will take several full rotations. If you feel comfortable, you can put both thumbs in the pinch pot, and then you can use those with both of your hands, pressing with your fingers on the outside and your thumb on the inside, always supporting the part that you're working on, so squeezing between thumb and finger. It's going to stay a deeper pinch pot, which we want, rather than a big wide. We want relatively deep. If you tend to pinch between your thumb and maybe the spot between your first and second digit, or the first joint in your fingers, it'll be a wider, shallower bowl if you pinch lower on your finger. Now here I'm going to look for any lumpy spots, big spots, little spots, anywhere either on the vertical or the circumference of the pinch pot that is not uniform. I'm going to try and squeeze it so that this becomes relatively consistent thickness and size across the whole pinch pot. Once it's basically the same size and thickness, I'm going to pinch 2 opposite sides to make the mouth of a frog. We're going to make a little frog with a top hat, and we're also going to learn a few different things, including using pinch pot building, slab building, and coil building. Now, if you have any areas where there's cracks on the surface, take a moment with your fingers, maybe even dampen them slightly, and smooth those out. Then, with your remaining clay, take off a good-sized chunk, about the size of the tip, the first digit of your thumb, break the remaining clay in half, and then use one of those halves and set everything else aside. Now, we're also going to use a rolling pin, which we want to have one of at our table, maybe 2, and we're going to roll out enough clay for a rectangle about 4 inches by 2 inches. Doesn't have to be super perfect or exact, but that's our approximate goal. We want to roll out a consistently thick slab, and we want it to be about the thickness of one of the plastic modeling tools. So it could be as thick as it is in the middle, or a little bit more toward the end. Way on the end is too thin, so don't make it too skinny. Then we're going to cut a rectangle out. We're going to try to cut the biggest rectangle we can. My first or second cut, I guess, was not very straight, so I'm going to try to correct that with my next ones. Then I'm going to take all the scraps and cuttings and I set those aside because we're going to use them later. This is going to be the stovepipe for a top hat for our frog. So we're going to scratch and attach the edges, also known as score and slip. Scoring is carving lines into the surface. You can do that with the metal rib tool or with your knife or needle tool, showing both examples here, but either way, you scratch in 2 directions that are opposite to each other, and then you rub some water onto the surface very gently. Now, I've had my clay out for a while, so it's starting to get dry and form cracks on the surface, so I take a moment to rub a little bit of clay on both sides so that it can absorb some water. Then I'm back to my joining, and I'm going to rub some water on top of those cracks. What I'm trying to illustrate here is that you should be able to see the scratches a little bit, but they should be obscured some with muddy water. Then we're going to coil this up, and we're trying to make the two ends meet, the two short ends. We're going to squish them together, but pressing pretty firmly from opposite sides. And once they are starting to stick together, notice I've got my thumb or my finger right beneath the joint so that wherever I'm pressing together, I have the clay supported. Once I've got that started, I'm going to blend across the joint, keeping support beneath it, but I'm going to try to erase or get rid of the lines that show me that this was originally a joint. We want it to look like it was all one piece. Now, if I have some other cracks forming in my surface, I'm going to blend those as well. Notice that no matter where I'm touching, I'm supporting from the inside as well. And put a little bit more water on the surface. Slabs tend to dry out faster than bigger, more bulky lumps, so something to keep in mind. I'm going to rub some clay and some water on the whole surface with my fingers first, and then I'm going to use a modeling tool. Both tools will do a great job of smoothing out the surface, so it's nice to see them both. And here I'm going in super speed a little bit, but you can see just by taking my time and going over the surface with many overlapping strokes, pressing firmly, that I can get a nice smooth finish. Then I'm going to take all my scraps from before, I'm going to squish them together, dip them into water, let it drain over my cup of water for just a second, and I'm going to squish them back together. I want to make this into another lump that I can roll into another slab, so first I'm going to wedge it together. Wedging is, again, using the heel of your hand to press the clay into a shape, ideally not trying to flatten it out, but instead trying to form a sphere or cube with our clay. We want to rotate every time that we squish it, otherwise it will get very thin and it will not get the effect that we're looking for.
I thought you wanted me for something.
Our next goal is to roll this out, and we're going to try to make a slab the same thickness as the first one. And this is going to be the brims of the hat. So we want one circle, the same diameter as our hat, and one that's significantly larger. So we're going to start with the larger one here. I'm going to cut that out, trying to keep about the same distance beyond the edge of the stovepipe around the whole circle. Trying to be as consistent as possible, but we're not too worried if it doesn't come out exactly perfect. Then I'm going to take this, and I happen to have enough space on my piece that I can cut both rims out. If you don't have that, then take the scrap, roll out another slab. It's really no big deal. Then we're going to scratch and attach. So we're going to scratch up the bottom and top of our stovepipe, and we're going to scratch up the top of both of the brims. Notice I'm working in one direction and then in an alternating direction. I'm doing that for both pieces. Then I'm going to rub a little bit of water on them. Now, I'm trying to take the top brim off, but it's kind of stuck on there. So you notice you can pick up the clay canvas square and peel them apart, but make sure to move your water or any other spillables, or else you're going to have a bad time. So take that off, peel them gently but firmly apart, take the extra scraps off. Notice that my clay pieces are starting to stick more. That's because my canvas square is wet. So it sticks less to dry areas, so try not to get the canvas square super wet. Now, as I'm joining, I have to make sure to blend all around the side. I already scratched and moistened the surface, so I'm going to use a finger or a modeling tool to blend the edges of my joints. Unblended joinery, where you can see the crack between two pieces, is far more likely to fall apart and break. So It makes a difference that you take the time to smooth these edges. It makes it much more likely that your piece will stay together and not fall to bits. I'm going to use my modeling tool for the same effect on the bottom. And notice I have to dig in a little bit, and then I'm holding the pieces with my hand so that there's good support around the whatever I'm scratching on. Sometimes it's hard to find the right angle. That's okay. Play around with it, but really support your clay wherever you're working on it. Clay can be a little bit delicate, a little fragile, and can need some very careful attention at times. And I also noticed that when I first started this process, the marks are pretty ugly and choppy. I can smooth those out after, but it's important that I make sure to get rid of the crack between the two bits. Now, I've just sealed up an air pocket, and you should never seal an air pocket. So I have to cut some kind of a hole. A small hole that allows gas or air trapped inside to escape is plenty. It could be on the bottom or the top. I poked it on top just so you'd be able to see and make sure, but you can leave yours on the bottom so long as it does not get sealed over. Now, our next step, we're going to take the small lump of clay that was about the size of the tip of our thumb. We're going to tear half of that off, and we're going to form it into a circle. We want as much of a sphere as possible, and I start by rolling that between the center of the palms of my two hands. And I might roll it a little bit on the table too, if that helps, but either way, I want the most circly circle I can get. Then I'm going to take and cut it in half with my knife. I'm going to scratch and attach the two flat cut sides, and I'm going to scratch those and attach those onto the opposite edges of the mouth, pretty close to the corners of the mouth. And these are going to be the eyes of my frog, but you'll notice that at first they're kind of creepy and terrifying. It's because they don't have eyelids. This little dude is clearly in the ugly stage right now, but he's going to come out and look really sharp. Now I'm going to make the eyelids by squeezing out some pancake type pieces. Thin, wide, they could be rectangular, might be a good size for them, or a large round cut in half. Either way, we're going to use a relatively flat side that's long enough to drape over and cover the eye. But we're only going to cover half of the eye with this piece. And we're going to cover the back half. So we're going to scratch one side of our pancake and the back half of the eye and the back of the head all around it. We're going to make sure that we only blend the eyelid onto the back and sides of the head and not onto the eye. If we blend onto the eye, it's going to end up looking pretty weird and ugly. So notice it looks a lot better with an eyelid. I've got my thumb underneath the eye to support wherever I'm pressing. And now I'm going to blend the back and sides. I use my fingers, I use my modeling tool, either one. Now we're going to do the same thing for the other eye. So again, making a pancake.
We're starting this video, continuing with
scratching and attaching and blending.
Here we're going to be blending
the
down
back
to the bottom
and
of the page in the
right
foreground,
and left
blending
sides,
those grasses.
not blending.
Even though it's hard to tell,
on the actual
notice
eye
that when
at all.
I'm blending, I'm still
And that's going to be
using
the
an
last step in
upward
this video.
motion. I'm picking
After
up
that,
the
we're
blending
going to have
stump
another
at the
short
top
video
of my
where
mark
we roll out some
and moving
coils
back to the bottom.
and
We
build
always
those,
want
scratch
our
and attach them on to make a
texture
couple
to
of
be
legs for our
directional with the
frog.
graph.
And then a couple more coils for a couple more legs, just to get us able to use another major clay building protocol known as coil building. So that's how we stop.